Hey you, and welcome back to the channel. This year has been insane and not at all what I thought it would look like. Also, I can't believe that it's May. Every single year seems to go by faster and faster, and let me tell you, makes me incredibly sad. Now, before we get started with the topic of the video, if you guys care about what I'm doing around the channel and other stuff I'm involved in, I just want to tell you that I have some new plans for the channel going forward. So look for a video on that. I'm going to put out a video. I think it's going to be really cool. I got a drone, so I'll be excited to play around and use that as well. Now, just in general, look for some new topics and some new formats. Obviously, the filmmaking stuff is going to be the main focus of the channel, and I'll always have color grading stuff, and I'll be putting videos out on that regularly, but I'm also going to try to branch out and talk about some other topics too, because there's a lot of topics within filmmaking, and you guys might be interested in other stuff like directing or screenwriting and that kind of stuff. So just look for other videos. It'll give me a chance to branch out as well and do some new things, and I think they'll be entertaining and something fun. Also, if you enjoy talk about screenwriting and scripts, I've actually been on a few episodes of Scripts on Saturdays, which is on Script Doctor's channel. I will link both the channel and I'll try to remember to link the actual videos that I've been involved in so far down below in the description. So if you're interested, go and check those out as well. We obviously talk a lot about scripts, stuff that's out there that you can also take a look at as well, and really just discuss what worked, what didn't work, and talking about writing in general. So if you like that kind of stuff, like I said, I'll try to link those videos down below. Go and check those out because I think they're really cool. That being said though, make sure you subscribe down to the channel below for all the new stuff and the videos coming out soon. And to all of those that have subscribed already, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Lots of fun, cool content coming up, so stick around. All right, so this week I really want to build on the foundation that we've already talked about. We've talked a lot about color management and how to set up your projects and project settings and all that kind of stuff. But where do you go from here? How do you start building a look, especially when you've opened up a project? Where do you start? How do you do it? That's what we're going to talk about this week. I really want this to be beginner friendly, and for people that haven't done a lot of color grading or are just stepping into it, I want this video to be accessible for you as well. Now, if you have any questions, obviously leave a comment down below. I'm always around answering questions, and I've seen other people as well answer questions. So if you run across anything that you're not sure about, definitely leave it below. Don't focus so much on the setup of what I'm doing as far as like every single little node that I'm using. Focus more on the concept of what I'm trying to do and the general workflow that I'm going to explain. And then you can take that and tweak it to your own process, your own workflow, your own color grading tree that you build out. I will jump in and show you a couple of nodes that I put on the tree myself, but it's not the be all end all. That's just how I set it up, but you can use a process that works for you as long as you kind of follow this general philosophy. Also, the more I've dived into color grading and the more I've done it myself, I realize that it's the small little steps that make a big difference. And that's really my first principle. Keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate your looks. Even with more experience and doing it more often, I have actually stuck to really two parts to my looks. All right, so you can see here now how I've set up my node graph, that it's just color management and contrast and then a look node. I went ahead and labeled them, but there's nothing going on here. I haven't done anything yet. If you don't know how I set up my color grading, take a look at my last video where I talk about color management. I'll link it down below as well. It just as an overview, I have my clips here in our group. Same camera, same group. They're all RE cameras and ARRI clips. So I have them all in the same group because that helps me in the pre-clip part of the node graph, which is over here, the first little tile. When you add your clips to a group, you'll get two more little dots here. And you can also do the drop-down menu here, and it'll show you pre-clip, clip, post-clip, and timeline. On the pre-clip level, which is the first little bubble, I have my CST in for this. So we're going from ARRI wide gamut to Davinci wide gamut. Skip the tone mapping, skip the gamut mapping for now. And then on my timeline level, so that it affects all of my clips, I have my look, which is built of my contrast and my color, my look development part, and my color space transform out, which is taking the Davinci wide gamut that I've been working in this entire time through my process out to Rec 709 Gamma 24 in this instance. I don't have anything at the clip level yet. There's just a regular node here, but it doesn't have anything in it. If I turn it on and off, you'll see nothing changes in the image and nothing in the post clip. This is the section that I work in the least. I usually don't have anything in here, so you probably won't see me using this section very much. It's mainly just pre-clip, clip, and timeline that I work in. So I always want to grade my clips on the individual clip level under my creative look. That's why I set this up first at the timeline level to make sure that all of the clips that I have are affected by this creative look I've chosen. Remember, the timeline portion of your node graph in this setup will affect everything on the timeline. That's why it's called the timeline space. So even if these were not in a group, it would still affect those clips as well. So if I set my look up this way, it gives me a good jumping off point for every single clip, and I'll show you that as I go along. All right, so let's build a simple look that will accentuate the clips we already have. I'm gonna do a little bit of split toning because I think the shots are already set up really well for that. Split toning is just pushing different colors into the highlights and the shadows. In this case, we already have cool colors in the shadowy parts. If I pick part of the image over here that I want to work on, I picked this hero shot here because it has both highlights, skin tone, and also some shadows and midtones as well, which I think gives us a good range of tones to work with to build our look. But with split toning, you have really cool colors already in the shadows, so I just want to push a little bit more cool and maybe shift some of these greens just a little bit. And then you also have skin tone and highlights over here that we could maybe warm up a bit and just push in saturation as well. Overall, that will just create some color contrast in this image, which is a really great way to build your looks, is to focus on what can bring more color contrast as well as actual contrast to your image. First though, let's start with actual contrast. So the only thing impacting our grade right now is the color space transform over here. If I turn it off, this is what the image looks like. Turn it back on. That was just the out node, and then also I have the in here. So if I take this off, it also changes the image as well. Together, they work to normalize this into a Rec 709 starting point. So let's go back to the timeline level and start making some creative adjustments to affect this shot that we have. I like to work with the tone curve when creating contrast. That way I can define every single little part of the image, since this is a continuous spectrum from 0 to 1. More often than not, I like going for an S curve, which gives the bottom end some lift, and that's very typical of film looks as well, and rolls off some of the highlights, which I actually find very appealing. Now, if you're looking closely, you'll see that I actually have this little dot here already on the tone curve. We're not going to cover it in this video, but this is just to preserve middle gray. Since contrast is the difference between the highest and the lowest values, essentially what you're doing here is you're taking away exposure, or what we're going to be doing is taking away exposure in the bottom end and adding exposure in the top end. At least for the initial look build, you want to make sure that you stay true to what was actually filmed and preserve middle gray. We'll cover that in another video though, but for now, just focus on the other concepts. And again, notice that this node is at the timeline level here, which means that it's going to be affecting every shot. So typically I'll go back and forth between shots just to make sure I like what I'm doing to the timeline as a whole. So if I start pulling down the bottom here, we're increasing contrast in the shadows. I'm going to do that lift off the bottom here just to give it this little bit right here, which means we're not going to have any values hitting true black or 0 on this end. Then I'm going to add some contrast to the highlights to the top end and do what we talked about earlier by just pulling down the highlights, giving it a little bit more of a smoother roll off here on the top end. So I like where we ended up with this. I think it's added a fair bit of contrast. And like I said, I also like to audition this on all my clips. So just going back and forth, if I turn this off, turn it back on, we've added some character to this shot. We've added some contrast. I like how that's looking. Again, turn it off, turn it back on. I think we've made a difference. All right, so just a quick little PSA on contrast and color grading in general. A lot of social media videos will have you believe that the basic transformation from whatever camera space you're working into Rec 709 is kind of where it stops with contrast and all that kind of stuff. And I'm here to tell you it's not true, right? I mean, we've all seen the social media videos where there's a drastic contrast between the log image and then they convert it to Rec 709. And the change is drastic, but that's just a starting off point. Especially as a filmmaker, there is a tendency, if you're actually shooting your own material or doing a lot of the shooting on set, if you're just looking at the log image, for example, there's a tendency to get used to how that image looks. And when you do the transform and basic contrast gets added back in, there's a tendency to not go any further with it. But take a look at any reference photo from movies or stills that you look up. they usually end up taking it a lot further than just basic contrast. They actually go in and add their own contrast as well. Trust me, it will make your look better. All right, now for the color or the look part, I'm going to be using split toning. I covered this more in depth in a prior video on my channel, so if you want to learn more, go check that video out. I'm going to be doing something somewhat similar though to what I did with contrast. So now if you see, I'm on my look node over here, and what I like to do when I'm working on looks like this is pop out this custom curves panel. So you can go here to the little 4-pointed thing and hit that, and then your custom curves come out. That is just so that we have a better view of what we're working with, and making little tiny changes here is going to be a lot easier than trying to work with it in this little window down here. Now, the first thing that I actually want to do is hit this little unlink icon. So what that does essentially is it lets me work with every single one of the color channels individually, instead of when they're linked together, one change is going to affect everything, including the alpha channel, which is going to change around my actual luminance and my contrast. I don't want that. So I'm going to hit unlink, and let's start with the red channel first. Now, like I said, I'm going to be doing something very similar to what I did with contrast. So essentially the first thing I want to do is add 2 points to my graph here. So I'm going to click here, or shift click here, and shift click just above it as well. And really that's just so that when I work with the red portion, I'm not affecting anything above. If I don't have this point and I start pulling down on the red line, what tends to happen is this part of the curve will pop up slightly as well, and I don't want to do that. So again, building off of my look and split toning, I want to add some cool tones to the bottom part of this image. The opposite of red is, if you notice, I go up, that's adding red. We're adding red to the image. If I pull down, I'm adding cyan to the image, as you can see here. I want this to just affect the bottom parts of our image, and I'm not going to pull it down that far because I think that's too much. But maybe here I think looks good. And typically what I'll do when I'm split toning again is make another point here, and then I will roll off the highlights again. But as you notice, this part of the curve starts going under the original 0 point here, the neutral point. So I like to also grab this and pull it back up. If you notice, you can actually see it starting to add some warm tones into the highlights there. And I like what that's doing. It's just a little bit, but it's subtle and I like it. Now, it doesn't look like much and this is pretty subtle, but if we turn this off and back on, you'll notice we have made a difference. It's cooled off some of the darker spots, whereas here it's looking a little bit warmer. If we turn this back on, we got some cool tones going in here, cool tones into the green, and then we've warmed up the highlights slightly. If I turn it off, you'll see we made a difference, especially here. And I like where we've landed. And again, now if we highlight both of these and turn both of these off and back on, you'll see we've actually made quite a difference to the image. You can also audition these by going to different clips, like I said before, and selecting both again and turning them off and then back on. You'll see we've added some character to these shots. I like the contrast. I like the color going into the cool parts of the image. It's subtle, but I think it's a good look. Again, you'll notice I did all of this at the timeline level of the project, so that way it's affecting all of my shots. So you can see what I was talking about before. Now, as I go through these shots, we have a base level that we're starting from. And what I would typically do next is probably start going shot by shot after this, so I can move back to the clip level of my timeline and then start making changes here. After I've set my initial look, it just becomes grading clip by clip at this point. So for example, with this clip that we're looking at, one thing, if you look at the vector scope here, we're sort of leaning very heavy into the reds and yellows into this quadrant. We're not so much sticking out on the other quadrants. We've got a little bit of color, but one of the things that I was talking about before was creating color contrast. So what can I do to improve this image a little bit? Well, I can go, for example, here to my third node. Let's say that's where I want to put my balance. And I can do something like pull the offset wheel and start kind of moving it around and seeing what it does to my image. If I land with it somewhere, maybe around here, I like what that did to the image. It also neutralized it a little bit, but sort of also brought it into the two different quadrants. So now if you look, we made a little bit of difference here. It's sticking out more towards the blue and cyans. If we turn this off, See, we go back to a very red, yellowish type of image, and then we turn it back on, and we're a little bit more neutral and sort of sticking over the quadrants here. You always want to push into two separate quadrants to create color contrast because opposites create good contrast, obviously. Also, if you didn't know, on a vector scope, the middle point is going to be your white point. So anything in the other directions are going to be heading towards the color. Over here, you have your, red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, and yellow. So as you're heading towards these points and out from the center, you are going towards those specific colors. And the further out you go, the more concentrated you are in a particular color, the more saturated. So you can see reds and yellows are sticking pretty far out. And then now we got blue coming down a little bit as well. All right, so I'm just going to reset this right now so that we can talk about building a look from a LUT. It's actually going to be pretty much exactly the same. I don't approach it any differently. I still use groups, for example. I still apply my look at the timeline level, and I still also do my color management as well. And then I'll still jump in and start adjusting clips individually like I just did. The interesting part about using LUTs, though, is you'll either have built the LUT and look yourself, or you'll get to experiment with different ones to see what you like. I've done a video on LUTs that goes into more detail on what they are, but essentially it's just a lookup table. So what that means is they take in a value and then spit out a different value based on whatever parameters you've set. The principles are going to be the same though. If you have multiple LUTs at your disposal, make sure you audition them across multiple clips. See what works for you, what you like, and make sure that you're also using high quality LUTs. In this example that I have here with these clips at the timeline level, I would probably get rid of one of these. So for example, let's reset this and delete the node. And now we're just going to have our look node where I can reset this so that instead of our color grading, we just have a blank node. Here, I would then proceed to add my LUT. Also, just make sure that you're using the correct LUT. And what do I mean by that? Since I'm letting Resolve handle my technical transforms in my color management, I'm not going to use a LUT that also has a technical transform in it. So for example, I can't drop the Resolve film LUT on this. So if I go here and go to film looks, for example, let's pick the Rec 709 Kodak film LUT. If I do that, we're getting some pretty interesting results here. Obviously not pleasant, not good. So you'll get some pretty wild looking results if you're not using the correct LUTs. And by that, I mean knowing what the LUT expects and what it spits out. This LUT actually spits out Rec 709 and it expects Cineon film log as the input, which we do not have in this image. Also, not to mention that on top of the technical transform that the LUT is already doing, so here at this node, we're spitting out Rec 709, but in the very next node here, thanks to our color management, we're telling Resolve to expect Davinci wide gamut and then do the conversion to Rec 709. So essentially, because I'm using the wrong LUT, I'm getting a weird result because I have two direct Rec 709 conversions happening in both nodes here, which means I'm going to get results like this, which are not pleasant. Another thing that you can actually use here in this look node instead of a LUT is a plugin. Now the plugin will do something very similar to a LUT. For example, I applied the Dehancer plugin to this node here to start building a look. The cool thing about this is that it gives you some base looks that you can choose from. For example, film stocks that you can go through and choose. Let's do 250 or 500T. And then you can also customize it. So for example, the source, I can need to tell it that it's Davinci wide gamut and Davinci intermediate since that's what we're working in. And then you have all these options to enhance your image. You can also go down and pick your print. So let's put it on Kodak film print. And then we can do stuff like mess around with the color density to increase saturation. And these types of plugins will essentially allow you to build your own look and make your own quote unquote sort of LUT as your look for the entire project. If you put it on the timeline level, it also affects your other clips as well. So you can see here we have a consistent look across all these shots. The cool thing about good plugins like this is that it'll let you choose your working color space. Like I said, we can specify that it's Davinci wide gamut, Davinci intermediate, and it'll work within that color space as well. You also have other options like Rec 709, Apple Gamma, ASUS, and so on and so forth that you can choose from. Or they have different camera profiles that you can choose from, and then you can proceed to select your camera here, and they have various camera profiles to work from. All right, so what are some of the benefits of working in a workflow like I just showed you? For one, One, you're working under a unified look that I've worked hard at the beginning stages of color grading to set up, so that way I have something to aim for. It gives you a base level of contrast to work with and a base level of color that you're aiming for or that you want to amplify in your look. Two, it'll avoid having to match every single color and contrast decision shot to shot. Will you still need to tweak each shot individually? Yes, but at least you have a base level to start from that you can aim for consistency then in every single shot after. And at least you're not doing every single one of those steps every single time to every single frame of your film project. Instead, I'm working to make sure that things like contrast and exposure and balance work for me on a shot-by-shot basis instead of worrying about the overall look and trying to match that by hand, shot for shot. This will help you move through all of your scenes faster, and you have to keep in mind that you're probably gonna have a lot of shots to grade in your project, and you don't wanna slow yourself down by having to do everything manually for every single shot. More often than not, it becomes a game of making the decision that will give you the most amount of impact across all of your shots. Also, this is a very first look into look development, which is a rabbit hole all onto itself, but it's very fun and very challenging as well. So if you're interested in things like this, maybe look into look development and learning some stuff about that because it's actually pretty fun. That's where I'm gonna leave it for this video though. Hopefully you guys learned something useful that you can pick up and use in your own projects, or at least something about this workflow that you might be able to adapt to your own style and your own way of color grading as well. Make sure you're subscribed, like this video, leave a comment, share this video out with people, and until next time, go out there and create something. La vedere.